When I have some free time, there's nothing I like more than wandering around listening to my favourite sound effects CD. And sometimes, if I'm very lucky, I'll run into some of our typical listeners who are always keen to start a conversation.
Hello, Mr. Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Timmy. How are you?
Well, one thing I was wondering is, why is it always so long between episodes?
Well, that's because I'm very busy doing other things, such as writing for From the Sublime, a new magazine featuring pop culture, film, TV, comic books, and even sport.
That sounds marvellous, Mr. Andrew. Where can I get a copy?
Visit FromTheSublime.com, where you can find the latest issue alongside back covers. Each issue features a range of articles, features, reviews, all written by some established journalists as well as up-and-coming writers.
Well, that sounds marvellous. Can I get a discount, perhaps?
Well, yes you can. If you put in the code, basically fine, at checkout, then you can get 15% off your first order.
That sounds amazing. What was that website again?
FromTheSublime.com. Get your copy today. Adam Buxton can sue me later. You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, voted the Spoilist's best podcast of the year, 5 years running. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we have been watching Ethics. It first aired the week of 2nd of March 1992. It had a story by Sarah Charnell and Stuart Charnell, a teleplay by Ronald D. Moore, and was directed by Chip Chalmers, which is a wonderful name. Hi, Chip. James, what is this one all about?
While playing a game of Find the Plastic Melting Radiation, some barrels fall on Worf, leaving him paralysed. Crusher invites a neurological specialist, Dr. Toby Russell, to assess his condition, and she offers a miracle cure with low odds of survival, which involves growing a new spine. Meanwhile, Worf asks Riker to help him commit ritual suicide, which he is not thrilled about, but Picard tells him that other cultures are different, so it's okay, and encourages him to help his friend. To give other people something to do, the Enterprise responds to a medical emergency, and Crusher asks for help from Russell, but she uses some experimental treatments which result in death. Riker lectures Worf, and Alexander gets sad, so Worf decides to live, and gets the experimental treatment. He almost dies, but then doesn't, because Klingons have double organs for everything, or something. But we all learn some important lessons along the way.
Did we though? Did we?
I mean, when you say double organs...
Look, we'll get to that. Alex, you had never seen this episode before. What did you make of it?
It always feels that it's always at a time when I'm stressed out or run down or having to work late. It always feels that it's during that period that we then set up a podcast recording where we have to watch an episode that's about ritualistic suicide.
In fairness, you enjoyed the last ritualistic suicide episode.
I'm not saying I didn't enjoy the previous one. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy this one. I'm just saying that an hour of discussion about the ethics of unaliving oneself is a bit heavy going.
So anyway, Worf is searching with Geordi for some kind of leak on the ship, and standing above some barrels, and a barrel melts and it falls on top of Worf, and his instinct is to turn his back onto the barrel so it falls in his barrel. Now, do you think this was deliberately an incredibly low-key and quite rubbish incident so Worf would be dying without honour? Is it set up to be that way? Because I just think we've had so many episodes where interesting things happen, or there would be ways you could get injured on a starship or on an away mission. You could even have just started the episode bringing him up, there's been a terrible accident. But here it's just the lamest injury ever.
That's a good point. Because if it was in battle, then you could have Worf justifying his suicide by saying, I have died in battle. But now it's just, no, he died in barrel.
Very strong.
I think everyone should stop for a moment, like pause the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review.
Citizen Kane applause gif.
Exactly. Send us a Citizen Kane applause gif wherever you send your gifs now. We're on Threads. It might not exist by the time this podcast gets released. Who knows?
Can you send gifs on Thread? I have genuinely no idea.
And Dr. Crusher has to break it to him. And I don't know if she's got a great bedside manner.
I did notice the smiling.
She's a lot of smiling.
It's funny, really, when you think about it.
You'll never walk again.
I would step back a second, though, to the barrel collapse. God, I was trying to think of a way of making that sound interesting or dramatic, but there really isn't one. For a futuristic spaceship, I just have certain questions over the safety. I'm not sure that would pass the muster at shelves in Costco, let alone massive radioactive barrels on a spaceship that regularly gets thrown from side to side. How are any of them still standing?
I'm just imagining someone going into Costco to buy one of them radioactive barrels.
I mean, you're right, though, because it's like, those presumably, they don't put them up with a cherry picker or anything, like get transported. Why do they need to be open at all? Why is that not just a sort of sealed container? Like, you don't need to have front-loading access to them, do you?
A rope, a luggage strap at most. Surely these things are not beyond the realms of science.
And perhaps, and again, I am no expert in engineering, don't have them on any wall where potentially there is some kind of radiation that can leak out. I don't know. What's it for anyway? Like, do they feed the puppies with it? It's like, what is in those barrels?
No, they got to put the puppies into the barrel.
Right.
And they disintegrate them, and then they can be used for the fuel.
See,
it's more efficient than just throwing them straight into the warp core.
This is why you read the comic books, isn't it? You get all that detail. Is it in the Star Trek The Next Generation technical manual?
It is, yeah.
So the barrels somewhat implausible.
Why is the chief of security looking for a radioactive barrel?
Why is the chief engineer looking for a radioactive barrel? This is lower decks work.
Well, if it hasn't been cancelled by the time of the next season.
But anyway, were you expecting Worf's injury to be as bad as it was? He can barely move, except when he does.
Yeah, I feel it's quite a dramatic injury for, as I say, low-stakes Donkey Kong, but I'll roll with it, I guess. Like the barrel.
And I guess we've got this future where it seems that it's very difficult to get injured for anything terrible to happen to people because they've got such incredible medical technology, and then it's like you're defeated by an object falling. You're not immune to cartoon injuries. So
we can cure pretty much anything these days. We can cure cancer. We can get rid of your cataracts. Oh, my spine's broken. Oh, sorry, it's too far. Too much.
No one's ever really looked into that. And I guess they say that about Klingons, that they don't do medical research because it's dishonourable or whatever. And also, at that point, it's revealed the clunky Klingons have a lot of redundancy systems, and they basically have backups for every single organ. Does anyone want to make some cock gags now?
You know what's really interesting about that whole redundant organ plot? It's completely redundant. They could lift that out of the story, and then all you would lose is the death, which was completely unnecessary because there was no great revelation from that death. It wasn't like Crusher realised that this experimental medicine used earlier in the episode could be used to revive Worf.
No.
So the whole duplicated organs, what was the purpose of it?
Page count.
This episode is a really weird one, I think, because I think it misses the mark on virtually every level. So we have the big guest star played by Caroline Cava as Dr. Toby Russell, and she's a maverick. She just wants to basically do experiments on humanoids, on living sentient beings which aren't proven, and
she's come as Hillary Clinton.
I mean, very much so. She just, I don't know what she guest starred in. She played Sam Beckett's mother on The Quantum Leap, but she was, I think she was in a lot of guest roles in the 90s. I feel, but it might be just the Quantum Leap one is stuck in my head because that's just a thing I've watched a million times. But that character, and like, she obviously sort of basically murders a patient during the disaster and doesn't face any consequences. Then they do the operation in the end after, like, we can talk about Picard in this episode, but they do the operation, and then at the end she's just like, yeah, that was kind of went well. And it's like, nobody learned anything in this episode. There isn't really a morality play in this one. There's a bad person who does reckless things and then succeeds because we need to not kill off our series regulars.
You're very much on Crusher's side throughout the whole thing, but you feel like it's missing that moment at the end where Crusher says she's reported her to Starfleet and she won't be, her experiments are going to end.
For an episode that is sort of doing Half a Life again with a different take, if essentially going, what if Half a Life but disability? Is it not odd that they have Worf discussing the matter with Riker, but never with the actual member of the crew that has a disability?
You would have thought, I mean, they gave a lot of people time off. You would have thought, Geordi and Data would have come to visit and you would have got some hilarious moments out of that. Geordi would have brought him a box of roses and they would have went through it and said, oh, and here's my favourite, the golden bar. Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's just, if you really want to explore that issue, Riker's not really the one to do it because there isn't anywhere really to go with Riker covering it, which is why ultimately they get around it by having him say, well, I read through Klingon lore and I found this loophole. Which you go, okay, but I mean, you're sort of circumventing the issue you've deemed to create to discuss. But yeah, you do have a character. If this is what you want to do, you do have a character that should be able to have that open and frank discussion with Worf about the value of life and not being held back by a disability. It's weird.
But I think that is very much in the characters. Worf is very impulsive, whereas I don't think Riker is from that perspective. He's more thorough. So him finding this clause that forces Worf to reconsider, that does feel right to me. That's how you would take that story. The only issue is that isn't the A plot. It's ritualistic suicide is relegated to a B plot.
I guess Riker is the morally upstanding model Federation citizen, and so he is going to represent, I suppose, the all-American suicide is wrong, I can't believe anyone would end their life, that's very selfish kind of point of view. And like you say, there's sort of not anywhere to go with that because it's just the diametrically opposed viewpoints, and then you have Picard gleefully playing devil's advocate in this episode.
Give him the knife, that's what I say.
I mean, it doesn't very much feel like that. It's like, I've got this cushion here, why don't we just go now, the two of us, and see, it's not a life for him at all. And it's...
He'd like you to do it. He told me so.
He doesn't bring up his ties with the Klingon culture, which is what you would have thought his statement is kind of bedded in.
I feel Picard's only so fine with it because it's not him that's going to have to get his hands dirty. But had he been asked, and with his I am a Starfleet captain type attitude, and I am not able to bring a knife to a fellow officer, rather than saying, well, he's a Klingon. But we've done that thing before with Worf, where you say, well, he's not quite a Klingon. He's never really lived in Klingon society. So him holding on to these traditions and rituals doesn't really fit for him. And the way Picard's saying a Klingon life is not full unless he's doing everything. Well, does that make sense for Worf? And I guess we have that ending again, which I think we've had before when he sort of adopted Alexander properly, which is, well, we found another way. We found the third way. Yeah, not new stuff. But like you say, it would have been more interesting with LeVar Burton, with Geordi. And we just did that. We literally just did that in the Masterpiece Society, where we had a debate about should disabled people have a right to live, a slightly different take on it. That was about abortion.
Oh God, we didn't we? How did these episodes end up so close together?
But I think the disability is a means to an end in the story. It's all about how Klingon culture is so different to our own. That's the point, and how far should we go in respecting that? Which is exactly the same as what they did in Half a Life. But should it be any different because it's an officer? Do you have to lose some of your culture when you join Starfleet?
I guess that's the reason, though, that I'm disregarding it from that angle, is the fact that that is exactly what we covered in Half a Life.
But now it's one of the main characters, and I think there is value in changing the perspective slightly. I mean, for Half a Life, what we praised at the time was that it took an outsider, Lwaxana Troi, and it took another outsider. Whereas here, it's trying the same thing, but with the characters we know and love. Or we know and like.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dilemma. Do you lose sympathy for Worf when they say, well, you can have this procedure and you will get mobility back, you'll be able to live a full life, you'll be able to walk, it'll take a lot of hard work, but you'll never be fully able again, but you can get there, you'll be able to do most of the things you could do before. Does the technology aspect, does that change any of the thought about it?
It didn't for me, but I suppose that's because I was sort of reading it into a wider context of them. I wasn't just thinking of it in a sort of disability context. I was thinking of it in a sort of broader perspective, like chemotherapy, for example. Where obviously there are plenty of examples of people that would rather not carry through with chemotherapy. This is an upbeat episode to cover, isn't it? I hope you're all really enjoying this at home. I hope it's really livening up your lunch break.
There's not an implication, and I guess maybe that's the science fiction metaphor, is that he won't live a full life, that he'll be experiencing a lot of pain all the time or anything like that. That there's not that kind of idea that
cultural pain,
that it will be very difficult to live, which is obviously if some people have a progressive illness or if people do have some kind of injury, then that can very much be the case, that like doing everything is a struggle. And I guess you probably don't want to get too explicit with that in Star Trek The Next Generation, and that's why I suppose that's more implied, but it does come across in this that it's just like, I am too proud and I don't want people to see me, I am ashamed.
No, I think, as you said, Alex, it is cultural pain. Because we've got to remember, this is a character who would go on the holodeck and inflict himself with pain sticks.
And fight Skeletor.
Well, everyone's got their kinks. I guess because of the character it is, I can take that idea of cultural pain as a proxy for physical pain in this situation in a way that I wouldn't necessarily with other characters. I think it's just one of those ones where I'll go along with it.
I think it's very easy to forget in general because it seems like it's a Worf episode. You remember it as a Worf episode, a bit like you think Best of Both Worlds is a Picard episode when it's really a Riker episode. But it's easy to forget this is a Crusher episode, and because it's a Crusher episode, it's easy to forget. But as a character in this one, she doesn't really have much drive. It is very much, I'm a doctor, I'm ethical, I'm giving my patient some options, and here comes this other doctor with her experimental ideas, who is clearly not great.
Yeah, she doesn't try very hard to stop it, does she? She basically goes around tutting.
Even in, I guess, the C plot, the kind of medical emergency, which I don't even remember what it was, which is just like, we need to treat some patients. I was like, oh, you literally killed some patients by treating them with your brand of medicine. And she was like, yeah, sometimes they die when I do that, but learn something.
I gave them a homeopathic remedy.
And at that point, other than, well, you're off the case, it doesn't feel like she actually ever experiences any consequences for her actions in this. And I'm not saying nominally the villain in this episode has to, meet a gruesome demise, but it does just feel like, well, this is just something that exists in the world and you have to deal with it. And Star Trek with shades of grey is sometimes, it's a terrible episode, but in general, I like a bit of moralising in my Star Trek, and I'm not sure that there is any there. Like, is the message that sometimes advancements require risk?
Well, no, that's not the message. We're on Crusher's side, even against Picard, because he champions this surgery, which is strange, and it is a missed opportunity for Crusher to show some bravery and fight her side of the arguments. But the problem is that then Worf would be dead.
Well, I guess ideally, if you're doing this episode in the Star Trek way, Worf would be dead. If you have to have the lesson at the end, it's like, sometimes the risk is not worth it. Sometimes your own arrogance does not mean the correct outcome will happen.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that the surgery worked, but you need that extra twist at the end. You need something else. You can't have her get away with it, really. Well,
not so much with comeuppance for her, but something I sort of thought we were possibly heading towards, although I kind of also understand why we didn't, was... You remember the Doctor Who episode Kill the Moon? Do you remember that one?
Unfortunately.
Well, yeah. But so the whole thing there that Clara's put into the position of a great moral quandary and by the Doctor, and at the end of it, it's, well, I always knew you were going to make the right choice, but it had to be your choice. I kind of thought that's where we were going with Picard, which would sort of lessen the... he's being a bit of a dick this week. But no, it was just the arch both sidesing of the issue.
Yes, I find him basically trying to convince Crusher, who, like you say, is in the right, knows what she's doing, although perhaps doesn't understand Klingon culture as well. Picard's telling her, it's like, well, just let them do the surgery. You might as well. There's nothing to lose. Worf wants to die. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah, I'd feel a lot better about it if at the end of it, Crusher had sort of gone to Picard in a sort of archway and gone, well, Captain, you'll be surprised to know that he survived. And have him say, oh, Beverly, I always knew he would. I always trusted you to make the right decision. I just wanted to see if you trusted yourself. Or some such, pithy crap along those lines. I'd feel a lot better about that whole element. And then that I'd feel I wouldn't mind so much about the mad Doctor running away, because I'd at least feel like the internal dynamics are sorted a bit.
Yeah. You also have the Troy and Alexander strand, which is one that will develop throughout the series. Worf asking her to care for Alexander. I feel we've not seen much of Alexander, but in this kind of episode, it's important to have that father and son dynamic. Do you think that adds depth to it? Obviously, that is ultimately part of the solution, that Worf wants to live for his son, sort of.
I guess it's necessary, once you've set up that character, to have him there. It would be odd not to. Does it add anything more? I suppose it does. Though you could probably push it a bit further. So when Riker puts the knife down and goes, "No, I won't do you. You'll have to follow your own rules." And then he opened the door. I genuinely thought Alexander was about to walk in at that moment. "Here's the knife, son."
But that's when, in a couple of scenes later, Alexander does walk in, and that's when he tells him he's decided to live.
Yeah, it's the same end goal, but just in a slightly less shocking way.
I will say I did really like Worf trying to look strong for Alexander, standing up using those sensors on his legs and then falling down. It showed a weakness in Worf that you don't usually see.
Literally pride before a fall.
Ba-bum. I suppose it also that does also sort of give you a nice end beat to finish it on. Although it does feel very much like getting to the end of an episode of The Simpsons about Lisa and Homer not getting along or something and resolving at the end of, "Oh, honey, I'm going to spend more time with you." And then the next episode, of course, that's immediately forgotten. It feels like, well, I have no means of knowing at the moment, but I don't feel like it's going to be a groundbreaking change for that character.
What?
Reset, everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's okay if the show generally plays within the confines of it rules, and I feel here it is actually moving into territory where it's kind of not. It isn't. It certainly isn't resolving the moral argument. It doesn't. The worst thing could have been is, it would just be overall, well, suicide is wrong and everyone should just not ever consider that as an option, no matter what their life is like, and commend it that it doesn't fall on that. It doesn't pick a side in any argument. It isn't overly moralizing, but it does feel like it's lacking something in terms of character beats, and I'm not sure I can quite put my finger on it, what it is.
I think that's because there's a multitude of routes that you could go down, and any one of them would probably be satisfying. I can't quite pick which one is the optimum. Also,
quite a long sequence with surgery. We have the return of the red suits that they use for surgery in Star Trek, and I actually thought that was pretty gruesome for a family show. It seemed fairly graphic. I was surprised to see Worf has a spine that runs right down his back. That uniform covers it beautifully.
Just a small tangent. A red clothes in surgery, not completely counterintuitive.
Yeah, you'd think so, but Klingon blood's bright purple, of course.
Well, purple on red, I mean, that's not massively... Well, Vulcan's green, isn't it?
Maybe it just changes colour when it gets stained.
But yes, anyway, stepping aside, back to the other issue. Yes, he has a very big spine. Beat a whale to death with that.
I also found the sort of contrasts fairly interesting visually in this episode, because for some reason Worf is in a room which has lots of little LCD displays which you never see anywhere else in Star Trek, which look like Star Wars props, because they're sort of black with little coloured lights on them. And then you have, in the medical lab, you've actually got a hologram of a spine. I was like, I feel the technology is quite inconsistent in this world and this week. It's very much the 80s meets the 24th century.
I feel that whole sequence it's odd for reasons I can't put my finger on. It's not that it's bad, it's just, I don't know, maybe just a lengthy sort of medical procedure was just, I didn't really expect them to spend so much time on it.
No, they go into quite a lot of depth and quite a lot of surgical technobabble, and I'm still not quite sure, like...
For anatomy you have no idea about.
And I think they gave themselves a slightly ridiculous job in this. I don't think this is a million miles away from Spock's brain. Like, a spine is an absurd thing to replace It's like, this is connected to your brainstem and every motor function and how many nerve endings. And you're just like, yeah, this is the thing we're going to go for in this episode. Not some organ or whatever, not some damage. We're literally regrowing the entire spine based on a scan. It's replicating it. It's in a very serious episode. I feel that's a bit silly, isn't it?
Yeah, but the thing about Spock's brain is that his brain is stolen. And then it's been a while since I've seen it, but don't they replace it with like a computer for a bit?
Yeah, so they can drive his body around like he's a remote control car.
Yeah.
Another idea that Red Dwarf stole.
I'm not saying like that's not incredibly silly, but I'm just saying in this episode, you're asking a lot of your audience. I think if it was sort of repairing 4 vertebrae rather than your entire spinal column, you might go, oh, okay. But it doesn't really matter. That's not the important thing about the episode.
How could one barrel cause that much damage?
It's a pretty thick spine, isn't it? You'd expect it to stand up to a bit more wear.
I'll be honest, he's meant to have really super quick reactions, and that all seemed to happen very slowly for me. I feel like it had got out of the way.
Yeah, it is a bit sort of Austin Powers steamroller.
I like that he's having to do some rehab at the end, though. At least he's not, well, you're up on your feet and you're good to go. And you have the nice moment with Alexander where it's, I would like some help from my son. And it's, Worf's learned an important lesson and we all know about family.
Get your kids to do stuff for you.
Exactly. He has to be a full-time carer now.
That's why you have them. That and the organs.
And luckily, he's got a lot of spare.
Yeah.
If only he could have gone to the planet from Star Trek Insurrection for a little while and just healed there.
They should have said that in Insurrection. You should have said, my spine's feeling much better.
Anyway, I've said all I want to say about the episode, which was more than I was expecting. Overall, I find it watchable and interesting and dealing with issues, but ultimately pretty unsatisfying.
They missed the mark a little bit, but I like it when Star Trek takes risks like this. It's a subject that you wouldn't see tackled in a lot of other shows. And it's a subject that you kind of worry and think, oh, they're going to say something really offensive, aren't they? Accidentally. But they managed to be inoffensive. So props to them.
Okay, well, let's see what other props we can talk about in Quickfire.
Quickfire.
If Klingons have all these backup organs, in Discovery, when Clem Fandango is turned from a Klingon into a human, does that mean they bin half of the bits?
There certainly was the implication that they had binned a lot of bits. That whole thing makes very little sense to me. I don't understand. I feel I've spoken about this so many times, and I just always get stuck in a loop of why did they do it that way? Why did they take the guy's consciousness and put it onto? Why did you not put the Klingon consciousness into the human body? Never mind. And what was your plan again? What was your plan? Well, maybe get on a starship, and then we win the war. Good. Maybe it does. I mean, they seem to do a lot to his body to make him look that way. Well done, everyone. Klingon anatomy can be whatever you want it to be.
Lot of free space left around there. You can hear him rattle as he jogs.
Ronald D. Moore, who wrote that, said, I wasn't a big fan of doing medical shows to begin with, and that particular one had a ton of medical jargon and technology and medical ethics. So he was a big fan. But director Chip Chalmers, he was a fan of the episode. For the first time I can remember being serious interpersonal conflicts on the ship. That's one of the rules. Nobody gets in each other's face. Some pretty serious conflicts, and I think that was a huge redeeming value to that particular episode. For the first time, we saw Riker and Worf yelling at each other. We also saw some real tears and real emotions. So you have that scene with Riker and Picard where you sort of come in the middle of it and Riker's really angry and acting, and it just seemed really weird. It's like you'd already reached the escalation point with his frustration. Michael Piller, He said, I love greys. Wouldn't want to go to his house. I don't like black and whites. I don't like answering questions so easily for the audience. With ethics, again, we went out of our way not to make it easy for the audience to know what the right thing to do was. Contrasting views there.
Now, imagine that you've woken up after a terrible accident in which your spine has been crushed, and you come to the realisation that your doctor is called Crusher.
Wait a minute, you planned this?
Do you think that maybe there's like a rule in Starfleet where your doctor has to be named after whatever ailment you have?
Oh, well, I'm glad you could come at such short notice to help me, Dr. Cock's blown off. It's been a while since we've done a recording, so it's a good time. Well, I mean, it's not a good time, isn't it? It's never a good time, but it is time to return to the rampant ridiculousnesses of the Nitpicker's Guide. And I noticed a heading for ethics, because obviously you have the plot summary, and then you'll have plot oversights, continuity, trivia. I noticed a new heading that I've not noticed before. Maybe it's come up before, but I haven't seen this. Ruminations. So it piqued my interest. And I'm not even going to summarise it. I'll read it in full. Just before Worf goes into surgery, he asks Troy to care for his son should he die. Troy seems stunned by the request, but claims that she is honoured and agrees. At this point, the medical ensign comes in to prep Worf for the operation, and Troy leaves. Although the episode doesn't tell us where Troy goes, I have a pretty good idea. Troy immediately walks into Crusher's office, grabs the chief medical officer of the Enterprise by the neck, hoists her to her feet, yanks her to within an inch of her own face, and says with gritted teeth, Worf had better come through this operation alive, because if he doesn't, I'm going to be stuck with that Marclosian wind devil that he calls a son. Troy then finishes her explanation by shaking Crusher silly and shouting, Do you understand? At least, that's a scene I'd like to see.
What? I don't think he fully understood Troy as a character, to be honest.
She's an empath.
Maybe he thinks empath is like a warrior or something.
326 pages and he still finds ways to surprise me.
I'm sure you're all wondering what happens with Toby Russell after she left the Enterprise.
I can barely sleep at night.
Well, the novels tell us that over the next few years, Russell and Crusher continue to fight in published medical literature, and Leonard McCoy always sided with Crusher and often told Montgomery Scott of these publications. That's actually a spoiler for a later TNG episode. And Dr. Russell was also assigned to inspect the medical team on the Enterprise E. And she passed them. Yeah, so she never got her comeuppance.
Imagine having a character that appeared in an episode and then nothing else after that you can come up with whatever weird and fanciful outcome for that you can think of. They can go and do anything. And what you come up with is that essentially they have a fight in the Lancet. I don't know, I feel there's a paucity of ambition.
Oh, it also says that they met at a medical conference on Trill where they had a disagreement.
Oh, I take it all back.
Another one down. Not so many to go now. Oh no, there's loads. Next time we will be watching The Outcast. So I hope you'll join us for that. But for now, goodbye.
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 If you enjoyed that, then why not subscribe to the Garbage Podcast, celebrating 25 years of Red Dwarf 8. New episodes arrive on 18th of February. Find us on gazpacho-soup.com or wherever you get your podcasts. That's the Garbage Podcast, Series 8, starting 18th of February 2024.